Now we've had an introduction to AI. We've heard about some of the properties of environments, and we've seen some possible architecture for agents. I'd like next to show you some examples of AI in practice. And Sebastian and I have some experience personally in things we have done at Google, at NASA, and at Stanford, and I want to tell you a little bit about some of those. One of the best successes of AI technology at Google has been the machine translation system. Here we see an example of an article in Italian automatically translated into English. Now these systems are built for 50 different languages, and we can translate from any of the languages into any of the other languages. So that's over 2,500 different systems. And we've done this all using machine learning techniques, using AI techniques, rather than trying to build them by hand. And the way it works is that we go out and collect examples of text that's a line between the two languages. So we find, say, a newspaper that publishes two editions, an Italian edition and an English edition, and now we have examples of translations. And if anybody ever asked us for exactly the translation of this one particular article, then we could just look it up and say we already know that. But of course, we aren't often going to be asked that. Rather, we're going to be asked parts of this. Here's some words that we've seen before, and we have to figure out which words in this article correspond to which words in the translation article. And when we do that, by examining many millions of words of text in the two languages and making the correspondence, and then we can put that all together, and then when we see a new example of text that we haven't seen before, we can just look up what we've seen in the past for that correspondence. So the task is really two parts. Offline, before we see an example of text we want to translate, we first build our translation model. We do that by examining all the different examples and figuring out which part aligns to which. Now, when we're given a text to translate, we use that model and we go through and find the most probable translation. So what does it look like? Well, let's look at some example text. And rather than look at news articles, I'm going to look at something simpler. I'm going to switch from Italian to Chinese. Here's a bilingual text. Now, for large-scale machine translation, examples are found on the web. This example was found in a Chinese restaurant by Adam Lopez. Now, it's given for a text of this form that a line in Chinese corresponds to a line in English. And that's true for each of the individual lines. But to learn from this text, what we really want to discover is what individual words in Chinese correspond to individual words or small phrases in English. I've started that process by highlighting the word wonton in English. It appears 3 times throughout the text. Now, in each of those lines, there's a character that appears, and that's the only place in the Chinese text where that character appears. So that seems like it's a high probability that this character in Chinese corresponds to the word wonton in English. Let's see if we can go farther. My question for you is what word or what character or characters in Chinese corresponds to the word chicken in English? And here we see chicken appears in these locations. Click on the character or characters in Chinese that corresponds to chicken.